I. The Uneasy Empire. The year was 1765, and the British Empire stretched across oceans like a great red tide. In London, ministers boasted that the sun never set on their dominions. But in the American colonies, 13 slivers of settlement clinging to a vast, wild continent, the sun felt hotter, the shadows longer. Farmers, merchants, cobblers, teachers, runaway apprentices, and wealthy planters lived side by side in a world of wooden homes and dirt roads. They saw themselves as loyal subjects of King George III. But under that loyalty, something restless stirred, like wind rattling the shutters before a storm. That year Parliament passed the Stamp Act. For the first time, every legal paper, newspaper, deck of cards, and almanac required a stamp tax, one imposed not by their elected assemblies, but by a distant government across the sea. To a small empire, it was a simple measure. To the colonists, it was a warning. In Boston, a young printer's apprentice named Samuel Carter watched a mob gather outside the house of a stamp distributor. They carried effigies, lanterns, and voices loud enough to crack the night. Sam had never seen people so furious. "They tax our paper today," an old man muttered beside him, "our land tomorrow, and our liberty the day after." Sam didn't fully understand the politics. But he understood anger and fear when he saw it. And he saw both in every face. It was the beginning of something no one could yet name. 2. A continent awakens. For the next decade the colonies lived in a constant tremble, protests, boycotts, clashes with soldiers, new taxes, repealed taxes, then new ones again. Parliament tightened control, the colonies pushed back harder. Then came the Boston Massacre, snowballs turning into musket fire, 5 dead in the street. Sam saw one of the bodies, his blood staining the snow like spilled ink. That night he realized newspapers did not merely report history, they shaped it. The Tea Act followed, then the Boston Tea Party. Sam wasn't there when the Sons of Liberty hurled the crates into the harbor, but he printed the story the next morning. Clack 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 went the press, each thump echoing rebellion. In Virginia, a tall, soft-spoken planter named Thomas Jefferson felt the tension like a weight in the air. In Massachusetts, John Adams sharpened arguments like blades. In Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin, recently returned from London, warned, "The breach will widen. And once wide, it will never close again." Britain answered with the coercive acts, closing Boston's port, dissolving governments, sending more troops. A king and his colonies had stepped onto a path from which neither could retreat. 3. The shot that shook the world. April 19, 1775, dawn. British regulars marched toward Lexington and Concord to seize colonial weapons. Minutemen waited in the mist, hearts beating as loudly as their drums. Who fired the first shot? History never agreed. But when the crack split the morning air, the world changed forever. Sam Carter was there, carrying supplies for the militia. He saw men he'd known all his life fall to the earth. He saw farmers, who had never fired a shot in anger, chase the British all the way back to Boston. He saw what ordinary people could do when pushed too far. Revolution, he realized, wasn't a word. It was a feeling. Within weeks, thousands of colonists surrounded Boston. The Continental Congress chose a commander to lead them, George Washington, a man steady as granite, riding with posture so straight it seemed carved by nature rather than practice. "We are not yet soldiers," Washington said to his recruits, "but we shall become them." And they did, ragged, hungry, untrained, but determined. Britain had the world's greatest army. America had something harder to measure. For the long road to independence. In Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress debated the future. Some still hoped for reconciliation. Others believed the old ties had already burned. Sam, now a printer for congressional delegates, often delivered documents to Jefferson's lodgings. The Virginian worked late into the night, quill scratching across paper. He spoke little, but his eyes glowed with ideas too large for ordinary speech. By June 1776, the question could no longer be delayed. Should the colonies declare independence? The debate raged for days. John Adams thundered that freedom was a right, not a gift. Others warned that war with Britain would mean ruin, death, perhaps the end of everything. Jefferson listened, silent. Then he wrote the Declaration. Jefferson's room smelled of paper, ink, and candle smoke when he finished his draft. He handed it to Adams and Franklin. They made small edits, smoothing words but keeping the fire. On July 2, Congress voted for independence. On July 4, they approved the text that explained why. Sam printed the first broadside copy, his hands trembling as he read the words. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." It was as if lightning had struck the continent. These weren't laws, or taxes, or petitions. These were ideals, dangerous, beautiful, impossible, necessary ideals. When the Declaration was read aloud in Philadelphia, bells rang. Crowds cheered. Some cried. Others stared with quiet, reverent fear. Because in declaring independence, the colonies hadn't just broken from a king. They had signed their own death sentence if they failed. 6. Fire and blood. The war grew dark. Britain unleashed fleets, soldiers, and mercenaries. Cities burned. New York fell. Washington's men retreated again and again, their footprints in the snow marked with blood. Many said the revolution would collapse within months. But then came Trenton, when Washington crossed the icy Delaware on Christmas night and captured an entire Hessian force. Then Princeton, where he turned a retreat into a victory. Sam followed the army as a field printer and courier. He saw Washington ride among starving men, telling them, the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Those words kept soldiers marching when their stomachs were empty and their clothes were rags. The war dragged on, Saratoga, Valley Forge, the Southern Campaign, betrayal at West Point, and the burning of towns across the colonies. The revolution was not just muskets and battles. It was doubt. It was loss. It was the fear that the dream was too fragile to survive the world. And yet, the dream endured. 7. The world turns. Saratoga changed everything. When American forces captured an entire British army in 1777, France took notice. The old rival of Britain saw opportunity and sent ships, soldiers, and gold. The war was no longer a rebellion. It was a global conflict. Washington's army grew stronger. British resources stretched thinner. For the first time, victory seemed possible, not certain, but possible. Sam wrote dispatches that spread hope across the colonies. He had become more than a printer. He was a storyteller of the Revolution, carrying news that kept the spirit of liberty alive. 8. Yorktown. 1781. Cornwallis, Britain's most capable general, fortified Yorktown, Virginia. He expected evacuation by sea. But a French fleet blocked the bay. Washington and French General Rochambe brought armies from the north. For once, the trap closed around the British instead of the Americans. Washington ordered trenches dug, guns placed, strategies executed with relentless precision. Sam watched the bombardment from a nearby ridge. The sky glowed red for days. On October 19, Cornwallis surrendered. The sound of drums echoed across the fields, not victory drums, but the solemn beat of defeat. Sam saw Washington standing tall, not triumphant but humbled. He knew the war was not won by genius alone but by endurance. And by belief. 9. A nation born. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris recognized the United States of America. Sam returned to Boston, opened a printing shop, and placed above his door a motto from the Declaration: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Adams went home to his farm. Jefferson to Monticello. Franklin to his experiments. Washington returned to Mount Vernon, hoping to live quietly at last. No one knew what the new nation would become. No one knew if it would live up to its own ideals. But the people had done something unprecedented. They had declared that ordinary men had the right to choose their government, a radical idea destined to echo across the world. Epilogue, the unfinished promise. Years later, Sam Carter would walk the streets of a growing nation, one with newspapers, schools, debates, elections, arguments, and dreams. He would tell apprentices in his printing shop. The revolution didn't end at Yorktown. It didn't end with the Declaration. Every generation has to fight for freedom in its own way. The words on that parchment were not a completion, they were a beginning. And when he looked at the battered copy of the Declaration that he printed with trembling hands, he felt the truth of it. A nation is not built in a moment. It is built every day. By the people who believe in it.